Holeni, thank you so much for availing yourself for this interview. There's a great buzz, and there seems to be an era of excitement and anticipation, but without, seeming overly optimistic. What are your hopes for, the gathering of the BRICS Business Council gathering, but as well the BRICS, the hosting of South Africa of the, BRICS Summit?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about, the big opportunities. One, I think, we see that, there's about 9 work streams that are gathered here, ranging from energy to digitization, and banking and insurance and all the other aspects. So if you can just imagine the value chains that are represented within here, but more specifically, I'm participating on the energy one, and we understand and know the energy crisis that we are facing around the world, but also the great opportunity of transitioning from high carbon to low carbon, which opens up multiple opportunities for manufacturing, for localization, for also the minerals as well, because we have always dependent on the fossil fuel, and we have ignored other minerals that have become more important in these days, which are beyond your copper and beyond your other minerals like gold. So if you think of the abundance of vanadium and all those minerals that are going to become part of the mainstream for mining, but also going into the manufacturing side. So those are the opportunities that are coming through, in that there are new entrepreneurs that can come up, there are new business models that can come up, there's integration of even the marginalized people who can come into the business space.
How, though, do you think we are doing in terms of creating an environment for entrepreneurship? Because being very simplistic about it, entrepreneurship is about having the time, it's about having the context to be able to be creative, to be experiment, to fail. And we don't have that yet as a country.
Currently, I think, one of the speakers earlier was talking about, the fact that we're dealing with a crisis. And as long as we operate within a crisis, it's not easy to open up opportunities, especially for the youth, especially for the disabled, especially for women, and all the other marginalized, groups. So if you talk about entrepreneurship, for instance, it's one of the areas which I think going forward, even after this conference, there needs to be greater focus, and focus, from a preparation point of view. And preparation means funding, it means skills, it means partnerships, it means collaborations. So all of those aspects, coming together. So as a country, we need to do a lot more to get the entrepreneurs to come on stream, to understand the opportunities, not just as a big a crisis that we are facing, but of the value chain components that each one can attack and be able to take forward. For instance, the manufacturing of solar PVs. We import a lot of solar PVs from China, from India, from Taiwan, and a whole lot of other countries. And think about the fact that we have the abundance of minerals here to be able to start the manufacturing. So we need to kickstart a huge industrialization program, which is not dissimilar to what built the industries that we have in South Africa, like electricity, but that is even bigger than what would have driven the economy of South Africa. So entrepreneurship is one that we would like to see. Even the small business departments, even the financing of businesses like CIFA and IDC and DBSA, and all of those players need to be carving out a specific aspect of industrialization for entrepreneurs.
Looking at the fact that China and India, comprise a third of the BRICS bloc countries in terms of the GDP, how do we trust that the playing fields are level, in the sense that if you talk, for instance, about how much we've been importing of, for instance, the solar PVs, how do we make sure that we gain from their expertise? Because surely if we stop importing from them, they lose out economically. And how do we balance the playing fields in this interaction as BRICS?
I think the equation is very easy. We sit with an abundance of minerals. And as an African continent, not just as South Africa. So if we start understanding the whole construct of BRICS and South Africa becoming part of it, but actually that part that is S for South Africa should stand for the continent. So if you think of the DRC, which has an abundance of the nickels, the abundance of lithium, and abundance of a host of minerals, there ought to be a pact through the free trade agreement that allows the African continent to operate as a bloc. So if China, India, and all the buyers of those minerals that goes into the PVs, that goes into the batteries, that goes into the various components, the steel and all of those things, the buyers of those things should at least have an understanding that they are not just buying those unbeneficiated. That's number one. So the beneficiation program is what we need to get the other partners in the BRICS to understand, that there's beneficiation that will benefit the African continent. For instance, it's not good enough to take from the pit into the pot and it goes without any value. So there needs to be value addition from our side. Some of the companies who are coming out as mining companies to seek mining licenses on the continent, they also need to be part of that beneficiation process, so that by the time those minerals depart the country or the countries, they are at a certain stage which is of value to the countries from a foreign exchange point of view. So those are the agendas that, if we want to balance the equation, we own the minerals. We can sit back and hold back the minerals, but however, it will not be helpful, because we need to then enter a conversation. I'll give an example, which is something which is very departs from the energy discussion. Botswana, De Beers, as well as the Botswana government, they have had to renegotiate because they sit with an abundance of diamonds, for instance. But that abundance of diamonds means that, you know, there's a beneficiation process that must take place before they are exported. So similar to what we are facing with those opportunities. So the opportunities, really, we are in the driving seat, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are the drivers as opposed to be the driven.
Everything that you're saying seems obvious through this conversation. Why is it that it's not happening, or it has not happened up to this point? Because what you're saying is factual.
Yeah.
You look at, for instance, what is happening with Niger,
Sure.
And how do you see the BRICS partners, and particularly South Africa, counteracting what will probably be challenged in terms of making these changes?
I think the breakthrough of having the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement having been signed by, in fact, the majority, if not by now, all of the countries on the continent, is a crucial one. The second one is the realization, for instance, when African countries and presidents are invited, you know, to the various forums, the G7s, the G8s, and whatever the case may be, to the point where they've realized that, hang on, we're going there as individuals, but we need to be coming up with a collective that says we are nominating so-and-so to be our representative. So there's more and more an agenda that says we can't operate as being divided and conquered, but we need to operate, you know, in a way that, you know, takes away the fact that, you know, I am important in my country, but to the understanding that we are all important in the continent. But we have South Africa, who is going to be our best representative in this aspect. We have Nigeria, who is going to represent us, for instance, in the petroleums and the oil. We have Kenya, that's going to represent us in the digital economy. So I think the realization of bringing all of those players to the understanding of their strengths and the roles that each one must play is the game changer here. And we see that being negotiated quite strongly through the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, which would allow as well for intra-Africa trade, which is one that will change the fortunes of many countries. Instead of importing bread for some of the countries, you know, from their former colonial masters, they can actually build, you know, facilities and be supported by the countries to be able to have bakeries, so as something as simple as that. But the equipment and all of those things to be done within the continent. So the realization of the roles that various people play is one that is coming to the fore more and more. And we've seen it with our own president, Cyril Ramaphosa, challenging France, for instance, for some of the promises that they've made. We've seen with Kenya as well, and so on. So that is what would allow the pact to come together to drive a common agenda.
Talking about roles again, how do we also make sure that as all these changes, positive changes are happening, that we're also making sure that we're seeing more females in all these structures that we're talking about? Because it's a glaring reality that a lot of these decisions are being made in very male-dominated spaces.
Look, I think the political agenda, which says women are crucial, is one that must be supported by most, if not all government, in fact, by all government. Our own, in terms of South Africa, there's a 50-50 gender balance, but not only a 50-50 gender balance in terms of, the top. That must be cascading into the various structures. I'm extremely pleased because of the panels that I'm seeing today. For instance, you have a female who is running the DBSA, and I think it's something that in the over 100 years of the existence of the DBSA, it's a first. So if you look at the financial services, you look at the energy space, the ocean economies and all of those, it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we bring in all of the expert, women who are, some are engineers, some are scientists, some are already in the financial space and accountants and so on. So that agenda is one that we must be conscious about. And even the BRICS needs to be very conscious about the fact that, women have a crucial role to play alongside the male counterparts, but that collaboration needs to be fostered, even in the smaller committees, not only at the higher echelons, but right down cascading to the lower levels and the lower functions of the various institutions and institutional arrangements.
We'll leave it at that. I know that you've also got, some other activities and engagements that you need to take part in. You can see.
Thank you so much. You can see, Lushnen.
You good? Good.